Yeah, hello everyone. I'd just like to apologise that we're having some panes of glass replaced upstairs, and they meant to come first thing this morning, but they've just turned up now. So sorry if it's a bit banging in the background. This is the quietest place in the house that I could come. So yeah, some of you will know me. I'm Laura Bell, Communications Director at Volonteurope, and today's session is about how to communicate successfully with the media. So the session will cover the following: what to think about when planning publicity, the basics of writing a press release, then how to promote your press release, and then at the end, as Piotr said, we've got plenty of time for discussion and any questions. So a little bit about me. As you know, I'm Communications Director at Volonteurope, a very grand title that I've recently been promoted to. I'm based in Southport, which is in the northwest of England, about half an hour north of Liverpool on the coast. I started my career as a news journalist working for a weekly newspaper, the Accrington Observer, and it was there that I won an award for Best News Journalist from the National Society of Editors, which I think Piotr put in the publicity that I'd won an award. I then went on to work for the Manchester Evening News, and I've also worked for the Liverpool Daily Post and Echo in Liverpool as a general news journalist. I was also specialist education correspondent, and while working in newspapers, I've also had experience of working on the news desk and also on the syndication desk, so kind of selling and pitching stories to the national newspapers. I eventually decided that was poor pay and poor hours, so I came out of journalism and I went into the public sector, and I worked for a council, heading up comms and marketing in a busy press office. And then I moved into the charity sector, working first for Greenhouse Charity, which is a sports for development charity in London, using the power of sport to transform the lives of children living in disadvantaged areas. And then I went to Volunteering Matters back when it was Community Service Volunteers. That's how I met Piotr and working for UNA. And I was also there to help the transition to the new name of Volunteering Matters. More recently, I've worked at a university press office up until October last year, when I set up my own business, and I've been a freelance PR, comms and marketing consultant since then. And I've been doing a bit of work, paid and volunteering for Volonteurope. Okay, so what to have a think about when planning publicity? A few key points. The first one is the aim, really. What are you trying to publicise and why? It could be something, announcing new funding. It could be a new programme, a really great case study you've got, or it could be an event like this webinar that we've organised. Then you've got to think, why are you trying to publicise? So it could be as general as just raising the profile, or it could be that you're looking for people to volunteer on a new programme, or as I mentioned with this webinar, sign up to an event. One of the most important things to continually think about is the audience. Who are you trying to reach, and what do you want them to do? And basically this will dictate how you communicate with them. Is it people or organisations that you already know? Is it people working in a specific sector or living in a geographical area, or is it the public? And then you need to think about how you're going to do it. Everywhere I've worked, there's always a tendency for people to want to communicate in every single way. So put something on a website, send out a press release, send out an email, put it in a newsletter, put it out on all the social media channels, which is great, but sometimes you just want to try and have a think about who is the audience and who are the people you're trying to reach with your message. For instance, if it's people you know, like most of us here today will be familiar with Volonteurope, you're our partners and friends and through the network. So the best way is email if you know someone. On our social media channels, we have a lot of engagement with your organisations on there. So that was the route we went to. Social media is great. If Alex is on the call, he had his session last week, which I know some of you will have attended. But you need to just think about like the algorithms, how things appear in news feeds. You need to think about the timing as to when you perhaps, put the news out there. I know in the UK, the most popular time online is between 5 and 7 p.m. when people were traditionally going home from work. It's also worth just thinking about who is on your social media channels. Again, I'm not going to go into it too much today because I know Alex will have covered it, but it's worth doing an audit of your channels, because you might think a certain audience is on one of your platforms when actually they're not. Because I know when I worked at the university, we had a press office Twitter account, which we assumed journalists and people in the media were following. So if we put something out there, it would get picked up. When we did the audit, it was actually just existing staff and alumni. So we weren't reaching the audience that we wanted to. And then when you decide that you want to do a press release, you need to again think about who the target audience is and what they're reading. So don't get me wrong, if you're after someone in social care or maybe in the nursing profession, yes, they will read a national newspaper, they might be interested in gardening, but chances are that they will be reading kind of a trade or sector press. So I know in the UK, Nursing Times is particularly popular online and in the staff room. And then when you think you've got a story that's suitable for a national, you really need to think, is it of major significance, or is it topical or controversial? Because often what we think is interesting to a national publication or national journalist is not actually that interesting. And then lastly, with any kind of publicity and any media work you do, you need to think about how you're going to evaluate the success. So how will you measure if the publicity is successful? I wish there was an answer to this that I could just say, do it this way, but it's been the source of debate for many years, and I still haven't found the most effective way. It varies depending on where you work. So there's various kind of metrics you can use. Obviously, like for today's webinar, a good example, you could look at sign-ups. So if you've got enough people attending, then your publicity's worked. But it's often difficult to kind of pin down where people have heard about you or your organization or your news, because you could have put something out on social media, you could have sent an email, or it could have been a colleague mentioning to another colleague about something. So, potentially things on like a webinar, you can ask on the sign-up form how they heard about the event, and that will give you a bit of an indication. Again, you can evaluate social media, the reach, the engagement, the shares and the comments. And similarly, when it comes to media coverage, it could be as simple as the amount of articles that you get published, or it could be where they're published. Is it a national publication, regional? Is it a local newspaper? Is it trade press? And then you can look at, again, the kind of potential reach and column width. So sometimes if you get things in national or kind of big European publications, the potential reach is enormous. And in reality, I think saying it's reached thousands and thousands of people is a little bit irrelevant and kind of invaluable, really, because you can never actually tell how many people have read it. And column width, that's a traditional one, where if you had 4 inches by 2 inches in a newspaper, that if you paid for that advertising space, it would cost you X thousands of pounds. So I mean, it can be quite helpful to prove your worth, particularly if you're in a lowly paid job, to say that to your boss, I've got you this amount of money in coverage. So yeah, it's just something to be mindful of, really. So when you've decided you want to write a press release that you're going to send out to the media, a few things you need to think about. So you need all your key information, the who, what, when, where, how. And then, yeah, when you're thinking about how to write a press release, sometimes you can have so much information in your head that you think, where am I going to start, or what information am I putting down in a press release? And one of the first things a news editor told me in my first job, I remember coming back from a council meeting, and there'd been lots of discussion and lots of arguments and lots of points made, and there was so much, and I thought, how am I going to write the story? And he just said, how would you explain it if you went down to the pub and told someone what you just heard? So the pub might not be your thing, or in the current times, you might not be allowed to go to the pub. But if you just have a think about how you would tell that story to a friend or relative, and often the first line is almost the outline of your press release. So I would go, oh, I'm doing a webinar session on, how to communicate effectively with the media. I'm going to, try and have a look at how we write a press release and answer some questions. That's the story there. Have a think about timings. It's slightly more relevant to when you are a journalist and if you're writing a press release. But for instance, if you're writing a press release today about an event next Thursday, about a forthcoming webinar, you might write next week, we're holding another webinar, which is fine if it's published today. You get it out to the media and it's published online. But if it's published on Monday and a newspaper or media outlet publishes it verbatim, then if it says next week, they'll think it's the following week. So if you do put kind of, or you're announcing funding, today we've got all this money, just put in brackets the date, so then the journalist can make sure it's correct when anything goes online or is printed. Quote, have a think who needs to be included and whether you're writing that or whether you need to allow time for them to supply a quote. And then the approval process, as I'm sure many of you are aware, getting things approved can sometimes take a bit of time, and particularly if they need to go externally for other organisations to see them. So, how are you going to structure your press release? Apologies if this is a little bit basic, but I remember being a bit kind of blown away by this when I learnt this as a trainee reporter. This is a news pyramid, and this is basically how the structure of how journalists are told to write their stories. So if you can replicate this as much as possible in your press release, then the less editing, the less work journalists have to do. And in a time of limited time and resources and dwindling staff numbers, the best press release you can write in the best format increases your chances of it getting published. So you've got 4 parts to it. The intro, which is obviously the most important or interesting part of the story, which should be a maximum of 25 words. By all means, go less. Sometimes you can go more, but I was always taught 20 to 25 words. Then you have the retelling of the intro. It's slightly confusing when I'm talking about this because as a journalist, every sentence is a new line, is a new par. And I know in reality in press releases, you will often write in paragraphs. But for this, the intro would be 1 sentence, one line. And then the retelling of the intro would be 2 or 3 sentences or pars. So the retelling, you're expanding the intro, explaining a bit more and justifying what you've said in the introduction. Then the next level is further information and quotes. That gives you a chance to explain the event or the news in full with quotes from relevant people. And then you come down to the background, which is, kind of any details as necessary about the event, links to similar stories or information, which adds impact to the story. So I wanted to show you kind of this structure in reality. And it's quite hard to actually find news stories that maybe weren't too topical or might cause offence. So I've actually managed to find she says, and then I'm trying to, is it here? Let me just see if I can. Yeah, I actually managed to find the original story that I was taught. So this was actually written in 2013. But I'll just show you the structure of the story. So new blow for plan to demolish old homes. So the introduction is, a major regeneration scheme, which would see 20,000 homes on Merseyside bulldozed, was dealt a blow last night after a top Labour peer attacked the plans. Okay, next line, expanding on the introduction. Lord Rogers cast doubt over John Prescott's proposals to bulldoze dilapidated houses in the county. And then a further little bit, kind of expanding the intro again, it's part of plans to demolish 400,000 homes in the north. And then you come on to the further info and quotes. So Lord Rogers, an architect, has joined the growing chorus of experts calling for a rethink. And then his quote. And then at the end of that, from kind of Lord Rogers is the chairman, right down, it's all just kind of background information. Because I was always taught when you're writing a news story or a press release, chances are that the person will only read the top 3 lines. So it's really important that you get all the key information at the top. Then if they're interested, they will then either carry on reading or scroll down to the very bottom, which will give you the information about when the event is. And just to say that I think this is still relevant, I'll show you a couple of recent stories which follow a similar structure. So you may have seen this, the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition. So the intro here is to photograph one of the rarest creatures on Earth, you have to be incredibly skilled and remarkably lucky. And then it tells you that Sergei Gorshkov was the winner. And what has he won? The third par, he's won the title of Wildlife Photographer of the Year. So kind of all the information that you need is really in those top, that is the story, basically. You know, if you go away now, you kind of know who's won, you've seen the picture, and you know what the competition was. Then you come down, you're kind of further expanding on what you've said in the introduction, and you've got the quote. So you've got the relevance there of the chair of judges commenting on it. And then you come down to all the background information, which you can continue to read right down to the bottom, where the competition is now in its 56th year. Kind of a bit of background, a little bit irrelevant, but still relevant to the story, but right down the bottom. And I'll just show you one more about Sir Elton John. Again, kind of the intro, Elton John and his ex-wife have resolved a legal dispute triggered by the star's autobiography. Kind of the story tells you everything in one line there. Then again, expanding on the intro, she sued Elton in June, claiming he broke the terms of their divorce deal. She initially asked for the injunction as well as damages, and then the case has now been settled. And then you can kind of bring that to life with a quote, which in this case is a joint statement. And that's everything you need to know. Then you just come down to the background. So then it goes on to details of what happened in the case, and you can read on. And in each of them, I forgot to say, but in the Tiger intro was 17 words. This Elton story is 25 words, and the first one I showed you is 26 words. So they can vary, but you can see how kind of short and concise is the way to go. Now let me come back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the intro, as I keep banging on, is the most important part of the story. You know, don't hide any important or interesting parts at the bottom of the story. You know, always try and select the most important bit of news or perhaps the most topical element. Again, use any drama or human interest stories. I mean, even if you're talking about something quite dry about funding or a product, people are interested because of the people behind that or the way that the product will be used to benefit people. So it's always about the human interest angle. And this is kind of a one you see a lot of. If it's an ongoing or a follow-up story, always put the latest news first. So I've got an example here, you know, where you'd write, you know, following on from Alex's social media training, that's part of our season of webinars, our comms director Laura will be delivering a session on how to write a press release. You need to kind of flip that round. So it's Volonteurope's comms director is set to deliver a session on how to write a good press release. Then you go into the old news. It's the latest in their season of online training sessions, which started with Alex Duffy's guide to social media. And there was another one, just wanted to kind of reiterate here. Again, the audience, always to try and think about what's most relevant to your readers. So I was just trying to think of an example here. If I was writing for a national newspaper, England has today, which was obviously yesterday, entered a national 3-tier lockdown system. Great, I mean, interesting. It says what you need to know. But for instance, what would be more relevant to people living where I am in Southport? I would write, from today, people living in Southport won't be able to leave the Merseyside area, mix with anyone outside their household, or go to the pub. Because I just think that is more relevant to the readers within this area. Similarly, in your introduction or the expanded intro, don't use a name unless they're really well known to the reader. Use a description instead. I mean, I think over here you could get away with the Queen or maybe Elton John, but it would be pointless to write Laura Bell is delivering a session on communicating with the media because no one would know who I am. Maybe if you put Volonteurope's comms director is delivering a session, some people might know. So you'd be better off putting, you know, a former journalist is delivering a session. It would be of more interest to a wider readership. And again, just try and use simple languages and sentences. I didn't mention, but my news editor taught me, and I think it's still true actually. It's for the UK, so maybe it's slightly better across Europe, but the average reading age, I mean, it could be tabloid, but even for a broadcast, a broadsheet newspaper, is around the age of 9. So just something to have in your mind as you're writing something. There's just a couple of bits as well I thought I'd put in related to funding and partners, just I thought it might be relevant to people here today, about how to use funding in a press release, which might be in your intro or it might be further down the story. But, you know, depending on the size of your organisation, £50 might be massive news. You know, obviously £1 million or, you know, 500,000 euros, 250,000 euros is interesting, but it's not the story. The story is about the impact. Who is it helping? What will the money enable you to do? Why did you get it over other organisations? And I've just made up a charity here, UK charity Banana. It's a great charity, but the yellow logo is a bit of a nightmare to work with. But anyway, the UK charity Banana has been awarded £50,000 from the EU Commission as part of its youth programme work. I mean, okay as an intro, fine, says what's happening. But I've just renosed it, and I'd write something like UK charity Banana is going to help young people battling depression thanks to £50,000 of European funding. I just hope that would spark a bit more interest, that then encourages the reader to read on to that all important kind of second and third part, and hopefully further on. Probably at the end of the press release, you can have like a notes to editors, where after you've written, you can just put any kind of background to an editor that you might like to say. You may be able to, in the kind of further info, put the full funding information, because I know it has to be included to comply with rules, but often you can get away with, as I say, putting it not in the main story of your press release, but in the notes to editors. And I know that when I was doing stuff at the university with the British Council, or sometimes with European funding in the education sector, there was a certain number for the funding grant that had to be included, but you can get away without putting it in the main story. You could just put it either further down towards the end of the press release in the background information, or you can just let the editor know of the publication. And similarly, a problem that some of you might come across, like how to include partner organisations. It's really hard, because if you're working on a programme with many partners, as we all do, you have lots of organisations to name check. So, you know, you could end up writing something like Banana is working with apple, pear, kiwi, plum, pineapple, peach, orange and grapes on a new 300k mental health programme. There's no easy answer to this, but I would suggest trying to use kind of one or two like lead organizations or main organizations, or failing that, perhaps yourself and others that are actually doing the legwork on the promotion, and then again kind of adding the others in the background information or the notes to editors. So you could just say something like Banana has joined forces with 8 leading charities to launch a new 300k mental health program. So intros, do's and don'ts. Yeah, so intros must tell the story in an interesting way, read easily with one breath, maximum 25 words, tell a reader about something that's happened, is about to happen, and or is relevant to them. Again, be relevant and clearly written, and stick to the most important or topical aspects. They must not, repeating myself, be too long or full of jargon, be overloaded with information or clauses. Use she, he, their, our without first explaining or naming who you're talking about, and start with a quote. I mean, there are exceptions to this, and it might be relevant. As I say, the Queen of England might be able to say, I hate horses, said the Queen, might be acceptable, but generally don't. Which brings me on to, once you've written the intro, expanded on your intro, you then really want a quote in there, because that's the way that you can bring the story to life. But it needs to be an accurate record of what somebody has said. And if you're cutting quotes, or if you're not sure exactly what has been said, paraphrase. And again, if it's a really long quote, don't use quote after quote after quote. Use a mix of direct and indirect speech. So yeah, only use quotes to add something of value to the story. Don't just repeat what you've already written. See this all the time. So I'm coming back to my my Banana charity and what we talked about earlier. So Banana has been awarded £50,000 from the EU Commission as part of its youth programme work. And then Bob Smith, who's Banana's chief executive, said, "It's great to have received this money from the EU Commission." I mean, nice. yes, you do have to say it, but it doesn't add anything to the story, and it certainly doesn't kind of bring the press release to life. So if we went back to the other previous example, you know, the UK charity Banana is going to help young people battling depression thanks to £50,000 of European funding. Bob Smith, Banana chief executive, said, "This money will allow us to reach hundreds of teenagers with depression and other mental health issues using interactive drama sessions." So again, even if people only read the top 2 lines, they'd know that it was funding from the European Commission. It's helping young people, it's battling depression, and they're going to do it through interactive drama sessions. So it's just trying to get as much kind of relevant, but kind of bringing the story to life. So quote do's and don'ts. Quotes need to be attributed to someone. They need to be relevant to the story, not be too long, and be correctly punctuated. So it's either the use of a colon or a comma, as I've just given examples there, quoting Piot. So you've got the 2 options. Again, in a press release, you probably would write in paragraphs, but as a journalist, I would write 1 sentence on each line. And when it's a quote, you would open the quote lines, and then you'd only close the quotes on the final line. So at the very end of the quote, not on each sentence. Then just coming on to some general style guidance, which you may or may not do. Ages, you would say 21-year-old or age 21. If you're naming someone, it would be the full name first and then their title and surname. And then capitals, I was taught only to cap up proper names, place names, or an organisation's name. Rank title, day, month, or acronyms. Don't cap up when not a full title, example, the charity, or a job description, chief executive, or collective words such as universities. I mean, it depends where you work, because some places do cap up job titles, but journalistically, we're always taught not to. Numbers, you always spell out in full words, 1 to 9, then use numerals, and never start a sentence with a numeral. You would write out the word. Again, don't use a percentage sign, but write percentage. And then the format for the dates that I was taught was day, month, date. And then acronyms, always spell the words out fully the first time with the acronym in brackets. So in this instance, National Health Service. So you put the National Health Service is today, whatever, and then throughout the rest of the press release, you can refer to it just as NHS. So touching upon headlines and busting the jargon, I wish I'd kept some examples of stuff that I've come across in the past, but we're a bit short of time today to go through them. But anyway, so writing the headline, some people know the headline and then write the press release following on because they've got an amazing headline. I'm often the other way around, but the headline should always reflect the content of the intro. So once you've got the first line written for your press release, then the headline should be kind of an even more concise version or shortened version of that. So don't worry if the headline is almost a repetition of your intro, because you're just sending the press release out. It's up to the media to do their own headlines. Try to avoid acronyms or specialist terms. We'll all know this in kind of the the charity and third sector. We have little terms that we always use. Again, it depends on the audience. I haven't got my little piece of paper, but I remember writing a piece at the university. I used to write a lot about academics research, and there was one doing research into streptomyces in soil, and it was all about protons and genes and sequencing. And I found out that streptomyces is basically just like a type of bacteria. I haven't got the exact wording in front of me, sorry. So it's dependent on your audience. If you're writing in a journal or writing to people who are in your sector, they'll understand what streptomyces is. But if it's for the general public, as soon as I said it's a harmless bacteria, it just brings it to life. Remove fillers and unnecessary words. Once you've written a press release, I mean, I still do this myself. It takes many years of kind of practice, and even now I can still cut words out of everything I write. Go back and you'll be surprised that you can kind of cut out maybe 10 to 20% of your word count if you're looking to reduce it down. A couple of examples here off the internet. yeah, not the best, but hopefully they'll illustrate the point. There is an octopus sitting on top of my car. Again, you don't need top of, because if there is an octopus sitting on your car, it will be sat on the top of your car, so you can lose a couple of words there. He has the ability to is the same as saying he can. You know, all of the guests love the event. You could take out of. You know, the decision was taken by the trustees. You could condense that to the trustees decided. And then similarly with the length, you know, as short as possible, really. Don't just pad things out for the sake of it, but 300 to 400 words should be kind of maximum for an average press release. So once you're happy with your press release and your structure, and there's no fillers and jargon and everything in there, you're ready to go. You need to think about who you're going to send it to. So you might be lucky enough to have a paid for media distribution system or database that you can use in your organizations. You can just go in and say, I want this to go to all the national newspapers. I want this to go to all the journalists covering health. But if not, you need to take a bit of time thinking about who do you really want to target with this press release. So you need to pull together a list of publications, and then everyone has a kind of news desk at email. But if you can target specific journalists, you know that you're getting it to kind of, it's all about that audience again, getting it to the right person. So it's worth having a look at what journalists are covering the area that you're writing about. I don't know why I've written egg there. I think that's meant to be example, social affairs, or the region that you're covering, or maybe it's politics. The best way to contact journalists nowadays is email. I do a lot of this now since I've been freelance, trying to get stories into the media. I always write a personalized email. So, hi, whoever, please find a story about whatever, which I thought might be of interest, you know, sign it off, put your phone number, and then never kind of put the press release as an attachment. Always cut and paste it, you know, the content into the body of the email, because otherwise it will go to spam, or journalists are kind of very wary of opening any attachments. And if you've got any images, and I mean like good images, not blurry or ones at the back of people's heads, if you've got some images to go with a story, then by all means include like 1 or 2 kind of low res just at the bottom, again, not attachments, but just copy them in, because if they're covering the story, they'll get back in touch with you and say, oh, can you send us the high res version of that picture? So yeah, email, get it sent off. I mean, in terms of timing, with online coverage at the moment, it could go online straight away. And if it's time dependent, then obviously expect it to be used quickly. But if it's interesting but not time dependent, it might be kept to fill a space as and when it comes up. If you want to follow up with, you know, publications, just bear in mind, for instance, national newspapers over here can get like 2,000 to 3,000 emails a day coming into the news desk. That wouldn't be to individual journalists, that would be to the generic news desk email. But you know, it does take time for them to work their way through. So if you've got an email address for a specific journalist who's, you know, the political editor for a particular publication, and your press release is related to politics and is newsy, and you think they should cover it, then do send them a follow-up email. You know, sometimes it can take, you know, 5 follow-up emails over the course of a few weeks before someone comes back and says, oh yeah, sorry, yeah, we are going to use it, or I will use that. Or sometimes just no. I mean, you can pick up a phone as well. A bit harder nowadays to actually get anyone to answer at the other end of the phone, but depending on the publication, you know, you can call and try and speak to journalists and say, I've got a great story, can I send over the press release? But one thing to remember with this is, like, ultimately, unless you're paying for coverage, the editor or journalist has the final say. If it's a really good story, you know, with or without, you know, good images, and it's got a really good chance of being covered. I mean, another way to do it, again, depending on if it's really big news or really exciting news, is to offer it specifically to a chosen journalist or kind of publication of your choice before the others, to kind of give them the inside scoop. But that's something that you can just contact them in advance, either via email or give them a call, excuse me, and see if they want to do that. And then if they're not interested, then you can just proceed as normal, sending your press release out to your target media. So again, anything you write as a press release is great content for your own website, and of course you can share it through your own social media channels. You can tag or share directly with journalists, and some also have a direct message option on their account. So I've used this recently actually to get something in Business Insider for a client. I just dropped a message to the relevant journalist directly, and said, I've got this press release, and they came back, said, yeah, here's my email address, please send it to me. And she came back and said, yes, they will profile them. So that was good. You can send personalized tweets to a journalist as well. This is something I did when I was at, a good example was when I was at Greenhouse. There was a Guardian journalist who'd written something about the power of sport. It was following on from the Olympics in like inspiring and changing lives. So I tweeted him and said, kind of following on from your piece about, sport inspiring change in communities, Greenhouse was launching a new program, thought it might be of interest, and it was. He ran a story, so that was great. And then, of course, over social media, you can share it with partner organisations, because by them retweeting, it allows you to reach a wider audience. So I feel like I've whittled through that really fast. Sorry, in amongst the banging, but I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if anyone doesn't want to ask questions, because I know in these type of situations sometimes you don't. Please do just drop me an email, or you can get my phone number off the website, and we can arrange a call to discuss anything.
Thanks so much, Laura. We actually have some questions that have been coming through. So I'll give, we would like to make it a little bit more interactive as well. So rather than me reading out the question, I'll put the audio on for the those participants who are asking the question, Laura, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So we'll go to Cristina Fernandez. Cristina, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can. Good afternoon.
Hello, Laura. First of all, congratulations for your presentation. It's super helpful. And it's always good to remain the basis, and you just give me some good tips that I take a good note of them. I just was sending some comments. My first one was related to the news of the hidden cameras and the tiger.
Yeah.
I was just reading the first line of the news, and it seems to me that they're more like a hook, like this kind of news that you post on Facebook and so on. So it's not really given like the information we need to know about the price in this case, but it's more like an example of the kind of news that you want just absolutely to click on when you are scrolling down on Facebook or on Twitter. So for me, it is not a good example of a press release, but it's a good one to see how you can have more audience from social media. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, you're right. I wouldn't have gone with the same kind of opening. I mean, I was always from a news background, so the way I write is kind of very straightforward, matter of fact, kind of bang, bang, bang. Whereas you say that kind of intro was a bit more of a hook, but you could see that kind of, that the second part and the structure it followed was almost, in that example, you could probably say the second line was perhaps the real intro. And then beyond that, the next line, a little bit more information about who won, and then kind of going into the quote. So no, I agree. Yeah, it's a lot of clickbait online at the moment.
Yeah, maybe it can be just a webinar itself, like some tips and strategies on how we can gain a rich audience wider from social media, how we have to write for these specific audiences.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you would tweak it. Yeah, you would tweak your, you'd probably put a slightly different kind of, intro, or you could tweak it. I mean, sometimes your press release that you're sending out might be different to the content that you put on your website as well, because the type of people who are coming to your website maybe already know you or are working within a specific area. So yeah, you're right. You can kind of almost re-nose or add a little bit of a kind of extra intro to the top if you're using it across social media.
Yeah, then it was just a small remark. You were indicating in your press releases examples like the day of the week. Is it really necessary, you think, to indicate the day of the week, or just in some particular cases? Like, for instance, football match has been reported from Saturday to Sunday, for instance. Yeah, it's always interesting to add it.
Yeah, it's not always relevant to have, you know, all of those details. It would be more if you were making kind of a major announcement, you know, today we've been given €500,000 for whatever, just so if you were putting today, so a journalist would know you'd put kind of today's full date. But no, you can shorten it, you know, as I've done. You don't have to spell out Thursday, you know, the full, you can shorten it down. It's just having an indication in there of the date, if it's relevant really, just in terms of timing and thinking about when it's going to be published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Okay. My first question was about the English style, because as you can hear, it's not my mother tongue. So I had a colleague who was British, and he advised me, if you have, like, for instance, like a quote split into different paragraphs, because sometimes it takes several paragraphs, so it's better to divide it a bit. He advised me to put quotes in the beginning of each paragraph. Is it the way to do it, or not? Because, for instance, in Spanish, it's not necessary. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, probably if you're doing paragraphs, you could put something, you know, always using you an example, Piotr, but Piotr said, you know, I'm looking forward to going back to Ibiza soon. You could close the quotes then, and then you could, you know, write something else, or you could then just put he added is another way to do it, to kind of split it up. But if it was just one paragraph and then another paragraph, but it was a continuous speech, there was no kind of actual break, then I wouldn't close them. No, it would all be one. So if you're closing the quotes, you need something to introduce the next set of quotes.
I mean, not the closing ones at the end of each paragraph, but more at the beginning of each paragraph, to the open ones.
Oh yes, yeah. You would kind of each line or each paragraph. Yes, you would put the quote marks. Yeah.
Okay.
You would only use the end ones at the very end of the full quote, even if there's about 10 sentences in there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thank you. And just the last question was about how to handle this database for journalists, because, yeah, you know, for instance, in my organization, we have like hundreds of email addresses, and sometimes it's not easy to handle those because there are changes on the staff, or they are really, really old addresses, and it's a bit messy. We used to use like Excel sheets, let's say, and it's not easy to keep it at date and to handle all those email addresses and so on. So I just wanted to know if you have some tips to give us regarding how to handle better this database.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're paying for a database, then the database company kind of keeps things up to date. But if it's just an in-house database, then unfortunately, yeah, journalists move around a lot, and things need to come out of date. So I mean, I always organize it by kind of, mine's more like topics, but I just use Excel for myself. So I just have it by, you know, like I might have technology, publications and contacts. I might have education, and then within that I can order it by, you know, all the BBC, you know, like national newspapers, sector press. So yeah, I mean, I've been quite lucky in most places that I've worked that I've had a kind of paid for database, you know, like a platform, so you can go in and use stuff. But now I'm freelance, I'm back to just using Excel, and there's no easy way, because someone just needs to keep on top of it. It's just one of those really boring tasks, because I have contacts, journalists that I want to contact about something, but then they've moved to a different paper and they could have moved to a completely different sector. So it's, yeah, there's kind of no easy answer to that one, sorry.
Yeah, I think the same. Yeah. Okay.
I wish I could say there was a good way, but unfortunately, yeah, there's not. But if it is in your organisation, I would recommend. It sounds like you do it already. Just trying to have everyone's contacts in kind of a central place. So whether it's in a shared folder, you know, just in an Excel or whatever platform you're using, just so everyone's feeding into there really. And you can see who, or even who the contact is. So it might be your contact, or it might be someone else's contact. So I could come to you and say, oh, I see you know so-and-so.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Thanks.
Great, thanks very much, Christina. Okay, we'll move to, we've got a question from Gail. Gail, I'll put you on the speaker now.
Hello there.
Hi, Gail.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. Sometimes it's very useful to just go back to basics because we kind of forget in all of this, you know, policy jargon stuff that at the end of the day, you need to make things, you really have to simplify things. So I really appreciate kind of sharing that stuff again. My question was very specific. So at the moment, what we've kind of been doing is using, you know, very general kind of Excel or database where we then use mail merge to send emails to journalists with our press release. And you were kind of mentioning that this is a good way to do it and to include content within the email. But what I was planning on potentially doing is to instead use a kind of newsletter format. So in the sense that it would still sort of look like an email, but it would be sent from a different newsletter, you know, sending system. Where you would kind of, you know, they would get an email with an image on top kind of in the banner and then the content below it. And I was kind of wondering, what would journalists prefer or be more tempted to click or open? Something that really looks like an email or something that looks more clean, but clearly it's not an email, it's something that's, you know, that has a little bit more design?
Yeah, I would probably say just kind of the basic is the best, really. It depends how simplistic. It sounds like using a very basic kind of newsletter format would be fine, but then you start to look like something that's a bit kind of paid for advertising, or maybe a little bit more kind of, you know, from a big PR company, you know, a bit more kind of flashy. I mean, ultimately, if you've got an amazing story, it doesn't matter how you get it to them. But anything that might potentially increase the size, you know, if you've got, you know, and the delivery at their end, if it might take up more space or might get blocked by a spam filter.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not saying it depends, you know, there's so many kind of variables. So I think, you know, making something look slick can be better than, you know, a kind of very long-winded, you know, incorrectly spaced email. You know, a slick version would work, but just kind of be mindful of those things, really, because even if you send a very basic, you know, really, I'm saying write a good press release, but if you send even a bit of a useless press release, but the story was good, they will go for it.
Okay, thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you, Gail.
Sorry, I was just on mute. Thanks, Gail, very much for your question, and Laura for answering. We've got another question from Esther. Unfortunately, she hasn't got camera or micro, so I will relay it. Esther would like to know if journalists are also more motivated to publish if there's an action linked with which they can visit.
What, like a link to a website?
Exactly,
kind of
or
like
something
background?
like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be quite helpful. It depends, yeah, related to the story. I mean, if there's a link in a story, you know, information about an event, go and sign up here, and then they can click on that and go. But really, it's about the story, really. If they don't know about your organization and that's not clear, then it might be worth saying, you know, for kind of further information, check out our website or check out this link. But I don't, it ultimately just comes down to how good the story is. You could have 50,000 hyperlinks in there, which might be helpful or not helpful. But if you've got a really good story, but anything for background, I would certainly kind of put on there, or even after the press release, just say, for further information about Volonteurope or whichever organization, please click here. It just saves them Googling, which is what they'll sit and do to follow up. So yeah, I mean, do it, but I'm not sure that it's essential. You can or you can't either way, I think.
Esther just added an extra question. She also meant a real practical action. I'm not really sure what that would entail, a real practical action, if you're doing something which is obviously based on an email message or something like that.
Sorry, say that again, Theo.
No, Esther said that she also means a real practical action, but I guess the question is, how do you still get to the real practical action? You still need to, if you're communicating digitally, you still need to be able to click on something or access some resource, right?
Oh yes, yeah. So I mean, if you're promoting someone, or if you're asking someone to sign something, or if you're asking them to go somewhere, I mean, if it's go to an event, they could just turn up, couldn't they, physically? So there's nothing that they could click. But if there's something maybe they have to register before, then yes, that should be included in the press release, because when that's published, the reader will need to be able to access that link to sign up in advance.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it is relevant to the story more than kind of background to the journalist.
Yeah, so for example, Esther is giving us further sort of
Sorry,
questions.
if I missed.
Yeah, no, it's correct. It's fine. It's like an action, basically, for example, organize to a visit or something like this. So yes, so I think you've answered now Esther's questions. We've got another. We're going to come back to Gail very quickly, because there is another question from Gail.
Hi, sorry, should have grouped my questions. I was just wondering, in terms of timing, if there are still, I remember using or hearing that it was best to send press releases first thing in the morning or in the morning, so that you get those emails or messages to the press inbox before it's flooded. I just wondered if those kinds of things, in terms of when is the best time to send a press release, if you had any recommendations on that, or is it just difficult because different people or journalists kind of look at it at different times? And maybe kind of linked to that as well, how much in advance would be good to send a press release if you're kind of sending it embargoed, for journalists to have enough time to kind of look at it, but not forget about it because you've sent it a week in advance?
Yeah, well, on the first question, the timing is just less irrelevant now, just because we're in a time of kind of 24-hour news and working. That used to sit really back in the old days, when I worked for print, when you had the old print presses and there were deadlines and newspapers came out later that day.
Yeah.
So things first thing in the morning, but it's on such a rolling basis now that it really doesn't matter if you send it 6 a.m. in the morning or 10 p.m. at night. The box will still go through, the journalists will still be looking at their emails. And then in terms of embargo, I didn't mention it in the thing, because it depends if it's like a genuine embargo, because a lot of people embargo things just pointlessly.
Yeah.
So if it's kind of a major story, it depends. If it's maybe an announcement that's linked to like funding, or that someone else is controlling, but you're putting a press release out, you need to try and coordinate with when they're putting the information out. But I mean, embargoed, a week or two in advance. It depends on the scale of the news. What type of thing were you perhaps thinking of, Gail?
So I work at European Digital Rights, and we do a lot of advocacy work. And for the moment, there's a lot of stuff related to, the Commission is going to put out this proposal, or, make amendments on this law, and then so potentially we want to let journalists know, hey, we're knowledgeable on this topic, we want to say something, we have a point of view, to make sure that, you know, check in with us if this is of interest. Yeah. So would a few days earlier kind of work to kind of send to say, hey, you know, get in touch with us, or, and, you know, we want to put out a press release? Yeah, I guess that.
In that instance, I would be thinking, you know, when are the, you know, when do the journalists first find out that news is coming? Because it won't be from you. It's your reaction to someone else's news. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So when are they finding out that that's coming? And that's when you want to be doing it. That's when you want to be contacting them. So as soon as it's almost in the public domain that something is coming, does that make sense? So yeah. Maybe on the Monday, the press start talking that, you know, the commission are going to make an announcement the following Monday related to whatever, yeah. And you've got something to comment on that, then I would put yours out, you know, under embargo at that time, so they've got it. So when they're preparing the article in advance, you know, ready for the news, they've got your stuff under embargo, where you're coming from, your comments, because 9 times out of 10, you know what's going to be said anyway. So I would dictate by when that's in the public domain, or when people know something is happening.
Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it. Okay, thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks very much, Laura. We don't have any more questions coming up. So obviously what we will do is we have recorded the session as well, so feel free. Okay, sorry, apologies, there are questions coming in from Robert Goya. I will give the voice to Robert now.
That it cannot go out before a certain date.
Hi, my name is Robert Goya, and I've overheard the conversation about an embargo, and I'm still an amateur in this. Can you specify more clearly what is an embargo? Thank you very much for the lecture.
Oh yes, so an embargo is commonly kind of like misused really by a lot of organisations. So you know, people trying, it's a way of controlling the news, but an embargo really is on kind of very like sensitive news that's usually kind of the government, or maybe the royal family, or you know, people like statements, give the media time in advance to know about it and to plan based. They might want to have you know, the front page of the newspaper about something that the Prime Minister is doing. So they will send the story out under embargo, so they know that it will reach the papers in time for them to have it on the same day that the papers are out, that Breakfast TV is having it. So it's a way of informing the media about something that's happening, but they're not allowed to say about it until a certain time and date. Does that...
Okay, so that kind of makes sense. So, for instance, when you can send an embargo related to a news story, right? To the media outlets, and they're not allowed to publish it until the news becomes officially posted. Is there any specific way you can send that embargo, or you just send it by email?
Yeah, you would just write embargoed across the top until kind of the date and time. But as I say, a lot of organisations tend to use an embargo just because, you know, I've known in the past maybe the chief exec's on holiday, so you've got some funding. It's been announced by the funding organisation on the Friday, but the chief exec's on holiday till the Monday, so you send it out and put an embargo until Monday morning, which is completely pointless because the news is already out there in the public domain on the Friday. So you've got to have like a really good reason why you're withholding that news. So I don't know under what circumstance it would be so topical or so sensitive that it would have to kind of be under embargo. It's usually for quite major things really, or, you know, you could be announcing results for a major survey or a major piece of research, and you've embargoed it until, you know, someone's doing a TV appearance that day. So under those type of situations, but, you know, the media, they may break it if it's not a kind of real embargo.
Everything seems more clear now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert.
That's great, Laura. We'll take one further question, and this is basically on whether you could advise on what you put in the subject of the email that you're sending out.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah. I didn't mention that. It depends if you know them or not, but I would tend to just put the headline of the press release in the title, because the headline the intro to your press release should be the best and most important bit of the story. Your headline should reflect that. So I would put the headline as the subject. You know, you could put possible story and then that, but I would just put that, and then that will capture their attention, and then they can read in the email the full information.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Laura, and I hope that answered also the question. So yes, we're coming to an end, Laura. So any final words from you?
No, just thank you, and I hope it was helpful. It's you know, quite a basic kind of introduction, but you know, some of the questions, there's no easy answer. You know, with this, there's some right and wrong, but with a lot of it, it really does depend on kind of the circumstances. But as I say, if anyone wants to follow up, then, you know, please do drop me an email, and if I can help with anything, then I will do. But thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thanks very much, Laura, and thank you everyone who came as well. So there was a further question that came from Anna at ILGA, but Anna, I suggest you contact Laura on the email address comms@volonteurope.eu, and I'm sure Laura will be able to answer your question and engage with you further. And please visit our website, volonteurope.eu. Tomorrow we will have a post available with a copy of the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint as well. So thanks again, Laura. I really learned a lot myself as well. So thank you very much, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And see you next time when we will be talking about creating accessible and understandable content for websites. We haven't got the date confirmed, but it will be at the end of this month. So we will definitely contact you again about that. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.